Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Thomas Daka Tabi Kumavok, Senior English and French teacher, professional translator and advisor, and also translation scholar, author of de la sémantique à la traduction, une approche sémantico-morphosyntactique de la traduction. In this video, we are going to discuss translating poetry, and for that we are going to look at the post I made last time on LinkedIn. I will read the post for you, and after that we are going to give some further details about what translating poetry is all about. In that post I made last time on LinkedIn, the post is titled Translating Poetry. Let me read it to you. Achieving high quality translation in poetry stands out as a particularly daunting task, since poetry thrives on inspiration and ingenuity. Part of this entails being able to write poems in either the source or the target language. Poetry belongs to the world of wonders, carried along by inspiration and creativity. Translating poetry is far from mere word-for-word rendering, but a genuine adaptation process in which the source text set off inspiration and serves as a springboard to build on. This inspiration needs to be rekindled, reshaped, or worked out in terms of the ingenious purity and refined beauty of the target language, while keeping the original intention of the poem intact. Put differently, translating poetry encompasses recreation and extrapolation grounded in intention, but most importantly in the semantic and stylistic repertoire of the target language. Of course, this type of adaptation rules out literal translations and brings forth the belles infidèles, which genuinely bear the poet's writer underlying vision. All right. What we are trying to say in this post is that poetry is a difficult exercise. That's the first thing we have to understand. Poetry is a difficult exercise. Poetry pertains to literal translation, and in order to tackle literal translation, you need to know what literature is all about. Literature, and most precisely poetry, has to do with creation. The writer is somebody who can be inspired. They get their inspiration from different sources. It may be through reading or through personal experience, and they decide to write. So this has to do with ingenuity, that is creativity, being able to create, to bring something new, to to show your vision of the world. And the next thing you have to know is that when we talk about poetry, poetry has an unorthodox syntax, which means that this is not the standard syntax that we know, that subject, verb, complement. No. In poetry, these rules are kind of put aside, and the syntax is, as I said it earlier, the syntax is unorthodox. And what is important in poetry is the content. But for you to be able to get that content, for you to be able to achieve high quality translation in poetry, you need to be able to know what poetry entails, and to be able to understand the poem, and to to have all the tools in the target language in order to recreate Now, when we are talking about recreation, we talk about recreation because the poem that we have to translate is a source of creation. This comes from the writer creativity, and they create because they want to give you what they think. They want to show you their their ability to communicate, to give information, to describe, and to, let's say, to discuss many important points. So for you to translate poetry, you need to understand that it has been created. The text has been created and it needs to be recreated. That's why we talk about recreation. We talk about recreation, which involves adaptation. When we talk about adaptation, we are not saying that we have to focus on structure. No, as you would say, as you will see it in my theory. What I advocate is a different way of looking at translation, because most of the time translators tend to reproduce the structure of the source language, a kind of they just copy the structure and they reproduce it in the target language, which is not the case. When it comes to poetry, it becomes much more difficult because the syntax is not normal. The syntax is unorthodox syntax. Some of the classical rules of syntax are not followed. And if you have to follow the syntax, then you are just going to get astray. What is important here is the content. Once I grasp the content of the source language, I now ask myself, how can I express this? How can I transfer this in the target language? What are the semantics, the lexical, the stylistic resources I have in the target language, which can allow me to express this reality? I will not reproduce the syntax because that syntax is the syntax of the source. I have to look at the syntax of the target and I have to recreate that syntax, because what is crucial here is the the content. That's why we talk about adaptation. Adaptation means free translation, not word for word rendering. Because if it's word for word rendering, then everybody can do it. And translating poetry is one of the most challenging exercise you can face. It's very difficult because if you don't understand the content of a poem, then you will not understand it. But for you to understand the content of a poem, you need to look into the principle of discursive act. What is discursive act? What are the things, what are the parameters to be taken into account? So, in a nutshell, we are looking at, when we translate poetry, we need to make sure that we grasp the poet intention. And we grasp the poet intention in the source language and we transfer it in the target language. That's why we talk about the bells and fidel. The bells and fidel, because this is something which the target poem may not be very similar to the source, because the target language has entails its rules. Its syntax is governed by different rules, and we are not translating the syntax. We are not translating syntax, we are translating the content. That's why you will see that the source syntax will be different from the target syntax. And the most important point is this question: did we transfer the poet's intention? Did we transfer the poet's intention? That's why we talk about recreation. Recreation, because the concept, the term belles infidèles, which was used by the French linguist Gilles Ménage, has to do with being not being bound to the source, but being able to adapt it adequately in terms of the stylistic device of the target language. So in sum, poetry pertains to literary translation. And when we talk about literary translation, we talk about creation. And when we talk about creation, this has to do with creativity. And in order to create, in order to translate, translating literary translation has to do with creating again. That is recreating, adapting. So if you translate poetry in terms of the source structure, then you are totally lost. You need to translate poetry in terms of the intention which is carried along in the text, not the word, because word for word rendering is not a good option in translation. And in poetry, this is very misleading. So in order to build capacities in translating poetry, I would advise you to read poems. It's true that not everybody is able to write poems. I would advise you to read poems, to read Greek poets' works, and possibly to write, because the more you get familiar with poems, the more you are able to translate poetry. So for those of you who would like to get more information about translating poetry, I would advise you to check the description below this video, and you will see what you will have my contact details, as well as all the information that is needed concerning this book. This is the book I actually talk about, de la sémantique à la traduction, une approche sémantico-morphosyntactique de la traduction. The book was published in France, and later last May 2025, and this book helps you to build capacity in order to refine your understanding of semantics and most precisely translation. So I hope you will enjoy this video, and don't forget to subscribe and share and leave comments. If you have comments, you leave comments, and any question you leave, I will be able to reply. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.